So yeah, hi. Thank you all for coming to attend this talk. I truly appreciate it. I hope you've all had a nice first day at the conference so far and are now ready to kick off the second day in this session where we are going to talk about why apprentices do not drink all the booze and hack all the things, and about rethinking education and game development. Yeah, but first of all, let me say a couple of things about the company and myself. So today I have the honors of being here on behalf of InnoGames. We are a game developer and publisher based here in Germany, focused around the simulation, strategy, and RPG genres. And on this slide, you can see a selection of our developed browser and mobile games. And you might know us from titles like Forge of Empires or one of our more recently released games, Rise of Cultures. Yeah, but who am I? My name is Alina. I have recently turned 21 years old, and I am currently employed as a game design intern working on our fantasy city builder, Elvenar. And just FYI, the term intern will actually be changing from next week on, because I will be starting my bachelor's degree in game design and management, so I will no longer be an intern, but actually be a working student at the company. Yeah, and although the word intern might not necessarily make it sound like it, I have actually already been at the company for about 3 years, completing my apprenticeship in software development. And yeah, what did that entail? So about 3 years ago, I started out as an apprentice in our corporate systems department, which focuses on supporting our live operation games in areas like payment, analytics, and many more. And beginning the second year of my apprenticeship, I went over to a position at Elvenar, where I joined our mobile front-end team as a developer. Yeah, and as mentioned, that is also the team I've remained in since the completion of my apprenticeship. Yeah, now, I know the slide looks great, right? It truly, truly does, but there was a time where a slide that would have shown my experience in the industry would have looked a whole lot different. Something like this, to be precise, because as for everyone, there was a time where I had no industry experience to showcase and was only desperately trying to seize my very first opportunity. At that time, I looked something like this, quite different, right? Was still going to school and only beginning to discover my passion for game development. And yeah, how I actually came to seize this opportunity, what led to me being here, it probably doesn't matter as much because I know we have some of the most amazing and most creative people working in this industry with the most different and the most individual backgrounds. But what is probably interesting about mine, I started out right after school, meaning that as soon as I have graduated, I started my position with basically zero experience, apart from a couple of things. So for one, there was of course fact-finding involved, reading a ton of articles on how people got into the industry and what it's like, practice projects, so learning to take my first steps around Unity and Blender, conventions and conferences attended, which of course led to connecting and networking, listening to a ton of talks, most of the time while doing the dishes, and of course, I loved games. So when I stumbled upon this apprenticeship opportunity, it seemed absolutely perfect, right? A straightforward entrance ticket. But then the following happened. So for one, I had a serious lot of persuasion to do, because I was fairly young, only 17 years old, and not only did I need to tell my parents that I was dreaming about making games, but that I also wasn't going to pursue a degree. I listed this point as kidding my peers, because while everybody else was busy researching universities, I was sitting at home trying to import a self-made tree from Blender into Unity. And it wasn't necessarily laughed at, but people definitely did perceive it as setting false priorities. Plenty of cover letters to write, because at that time German studios barely, if not at all, offered internship opportunities to students. What has mostly been communicated was lack of time and resources, which is very much understandable. There was also something which I perceived as gatekeeping going on, so countless of Reddit threads where people went on and on about how competitive, impossible, and absolutely toxic this industry was to get into. And as a youngster who really, really wanted to get a foot in the door and to learn, that was incredibly discouraging. Uncertainty and imposter syndrome, which I guess many experience on a daily basis, and I very much still do until this very day. For example, you can't even believe how long it took to convince myself that I'm worthy of standing here right now and presenting something to people that might have many more years worth of work experience than I do. Yeah, so these were the two sides fighting with each other over quite some time, passion versus drawbacks. And that was kind of the clean slate that I've entered this industry with. And as especially many of my international colleagues didn't quite know what apprenticeships are all about and how the concept works here in Germany, I would like to raise a bit of awareness for the system and what it felt like for someone just starting out in their career. I could very well imagine we have some fellow career starters sitting here. I could very well imagine we have some people sitting here that have already been in the industry for years. And if that is the case, I'm very, very glad you're here. I'm glad you care about those who are just starting out. Perhaps you're not currently mentoring someone, but I'm pretty sure you would have at least one career starter in your team, or perhaps you are considering mentoring someone at a future point. But yeah, speaking about my motivation for this talk, perhaps some of you would recognize these characters. This is a picture taken from the second installment of the Watch Dogs franchise, displaying the main protagonists, a group of programmers, and in a song that is part of the game's official soundtrack, it is stated that they would like to drink all the booze and hack all the things. Yeah, now, obviously, this is a game. Obviously, these characters are fictional, but as I was playing this game in combination with that quote blasting from the in-game radio, it was a great source of inspiration for this talk. Because sometimes it felt like this is the exact portrayal that people are facing who have not attended university and are nevertheless interested in computer science. And if that holds true, then we have a problem. And you might be thinking, oh yeah, she's just exaggerating. That couldn't possibly be true. Well, let's take a look. So in a survey of nearly 400 working parents, about 50% stated that they believe apprenticeships to be more appropriate for manual or blue-collar jobs, meaning hard manual labor, for example, such as construction, mining, and maintenance. Less than 20% believe apprenticeships have the same status as a university education. And only 10% of the 400 questions stated that they would rank an apprenticeship as a preferred qualification for their children. So if we think of computer science, we could say it is a common perception that if you would like to work at one of the more prestigious tech giants, for example, Google, you better have attended a similarly prestigious university. But it's not only the parent side we're talking about here. It is also businesses that simply do not or barely hire apprentices despite skill shortage claims. Scared or uncertain about recouping the cost of apprenticeship training, the uncertain magnitude of the productivity gains, and we could say that both of those fears also relate to the relatively flexible labor market, especially considering the impacts of the pandemic regarding home office and flexible working times and spaces. Now, that is all circulating stigma, but where does this bad image of apprentices even come from? And we should ask ourselves that question, because according to these findings, it is very much a problem. So let us start from the beginning and see how apprenticeships have even made their way into the tech industry. In general, the apprenticeship concept can be defined as a system for training a new generation of practitioners of a trade or profession with on-the-job training and some accompanying study. The idea of on-the-job training actually was first developed in the later Middle Ages and came to be supervised by craft guilds and town governments. So a master craftsman was entitled to employ young people as an inexpensive form of labor in exchange for providing food and lodging. And that concept must have been somewhat successful because it has made its way into the modern tech industry, although, yeah, the industry has gone quite astray from paying people with food and lodging. Now, with tech jobs being high on the rise and engineers and developers becoming higher in demand, a growing skills gap started to form. And tech companies found it increasingly harder to staff their open positions with qualified hires. Because many professions in the technology sector are so highly specialized in their technical and soft skills that the search for experts can sometimes feel like the search for a needle in a haystack. So it would, of course, make a lot of sense to adapt to this changing economy, and that is where apprenticeships come in handy, giving the employer a chance to train the future employees in-house, obviously making them familiar with employer-specific systems, technology, and business-specific modes of operation. In Germany, the apprenticeship concept, if we simplify it, looks a little bit like this. So I was working the usual 40-hour work weeks that many of us know at the company, although sometimes, to much confusion of my colleagues, I would disappear for a couple of them in order to attend theoretical lessons at the apprentice school. So I had normal lessons, exams, projects to hand in, and all that fun stuff. So my education was accompanied by a strong correlation between theory and practice. Approximately, very approximately, in a year, I would spend about 245 hours at school and 2,568 hours working at the company, just so you get a rough idea of how this time was actually being distributed. To understand how this concept is supposed to work out in an ideal world, let us take a look at this chart here. So on the x-axis, we have the period of the apprenticeship, as well as an indication of the period that will follow after the apprenticeship has been completed, so the employment as an experienced worker. On the y-axis, we have the wage and value of product produced, and in simpler words, the employer productivity and output, which we can also refer to as the marginal product. And yeah, let's not sugarcoat it. At the beginning of the apprenticeship, said output is going to be quite low, only increasing with the duration of the apprenticeship as one is also being trained in that craft. Now on the chart as well, we are depicting the wage of an apprentice compared to the wage of an experienced worker, which, as per usual, is quite a bit higher. The areas A and B indicate the costs that businesses will have should they engage in apprenticeship training, such as costs of supervision and direct training costs, for example, course fees. Additionally, there is an indication offered on the potential return to employers following the completion of employees following the completion of the apprenticeship, and that amounts to the area C. You should keep in mind that this graphic we're looking at is only indicative, as the employers questioned have provided input from many different disciplines and companies with differing size and net worth. So this is not only specific to apprenticeships in tech or the games industry. Now, usually, employers tend to pay their employees the value of their marginal product, but for the duration of the apprenticeship, the employer will pay a wage higher than the apprentice's actual output, with the expectation that the cost of doing so will be recouped later on by paying the fully trained apprentice a bit less than the actual value of the marginal product. So the main idea of the concept is, of course, that the apprentice's skills over the course of the program will lead to higher productivity and greater profit, and in other words, also a greater marginal product in the future. Now, that is obviously very important for an employer's decision on whether to engage in apprenticeship education or not. But monetary terms is actually not all we should be considering. Let's see what else could be coming into play here. A quite obvious advantage for the apprentice side is being able to earn while you learn. To put that into some sort of perspective, by earning my wage, I was able to move half across Germany and lead a fully self-financed life in Hamburg. And those are financial resources that I would have never dreamed of had I chosen to start a degree. Gaining recognized qualifications. Upon successfully completing the apprenticeship program, one will receive a state-approved certificate, meaning that after the apprenticeship completion, one can officially call themselves a state-approved software developer. And of course, the chance to gain work experience and to develop one's skills on the job taught by those who are most experienced in the industry one chose to work in. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not all fun and games. There are also a few disadvantages and drawbacks one could endure, or let's say perceive as such. For one, experiencing the age gap. And that is a factor not to be underestimated, because apprentices will undoubtedly notice it between themselves and those working within the same field. Because connecting with others can be harder. And it can in fact also foster the imposter syndrome, because of course it will feel incredibly intimidating to speak up in meetings if everybody else around you has so much more work experience than you do. Another factor is the competition. Apprenticeships might be a bit harder to score opposed to a regular university placement, because you're likely to go through many interviews and perhaps even trial days. And at this stage in life, that is going to be your first time sitting down at a table opposite of a recruiter, which can, let me say, as well, be incredibly intimidating. And yeah, also not to be underestimated, the shock to the system that going straight into an apprenticeship could induce. Because one will undoubtedly be faced with a lot more responsibility and accountability for the work they're doing, as these are not just grays. This is my work having a real impact on others, and that makes it a lot more personal. Now, let's look at the employer's side. We have seen before, if you remember the chart, apprentices are quite cost effective, generally being cheaper than regular employees, while they might reach the exact same productivity levels at the end of training. As we have also mentioned before, direct employment will fight the skills gap and train anew for the business very much sustainable generation of employees. And something I've also heard of quite often throughout the course of my apprenticeship, and something that again is apparently not to be underestimated, enthusiasm is simply contagious. Because the students, they chose this apprenticeship, they chose this model and program, and they want to learn. And believe me, in general, they are fascinated by the skills that you have. And this whole exchange of skill sets can actually foster motivation on both sides. As for the drawbacks, apprentices will demand an investment of resources, even if we're not necessarily speaking about monetary terms here. Because, yes, speaking from experience, apprentices will disrupt your workday to ask questions. Very politely, but they will. And the team will need to make up time for it. Apprentices will require your understanding, and they will require patience. Apprentices are a commitment and a responsibility, because simply by having them in your environment, you will be directly influencing the future workforce at your company. And interesting to mention, there might also be a few hidden costs for businesses, such as, for example, expenses needed in order for the apprentice to pursue their external education at school, like books and maybe even pieces of hardware. But yeah, of course, that's all very, very abstract, just a list, and it might be a bit hard to grasp as to what actually happens should an apprentice enter your work environment, or let's say invade one's business. So let us shortly put ourselves into apprentice perspective here. Hence, you arrive on your very first day, you receive your key card, and you scan it for the very first time. What you're going to feel are undoubtedly confusion and uncertainty. I would say this also very much relates to every employee that switches up their workplace or takes on a new position. Because business entered, keycard received and scanned, the whole process could look a little bit like this. For one, the apprentice will see a whole new technological environment, will need to familiarize oneself with the business's mode of operation, learn how to feel comfortable around new coworkers, learn to navigate conflicting viewpoints and perhaps even argue their own opinion in meetings, embrace complexity, something one will undoubtedly be faced with throughout the course of their apprenticeship, and last but not least, face bias and stereotypes that very likely are not even emitted by the workplace, but rather external sources, for example, parents that tell one you should have rather gotten a degree. Apprentices will need to follow team-specific tests and code style guidelines, perhaps without even possessing enough knowledge about the codebase itself, as that is something you only gain best over time. They will need to learn ways of becoming one with the team and building connections. All the common tooling used, like Jira, Bitbucket, ways of operations, And these things have all been quite new to me. And yes, they have all seemed quite overwhelming in the beginning. But most importantly, and also quite unfortunately, I do believe that I could have been prepared for a couple of these things a little bit better. And why that hasn't been the case, we would need to take a step back and talk about education being boring. Imagine attending school in Germany. Those who have done so are likely to relate to a couple of these points. I'm also most interested in the experience our international attendees have, and how they have perceived their education. But yeah, as said, imagine being a student attending a computer science class taught by a computer science teacher. A statement the student could make would be raising awareness for the fact that they have come in touch with technology even before preschool. But in most schools, computer science isn't even a mandatory subject. And if it is being offered, then most of the time the subject is only made available for students in the higher grades. Students would not consider picking the subject unless it would count for their final credit, meaning the grades earned wouldn't be relevant for the overall diploma one would like to hand into universities. Why are we focusing on Microsoft Word functionality? My school never offered computer science classes, but what we did have were a couple of voluntary courses that would teach us basic handling of software we could use in order to complete our schoolwork. However, that is still quite far from the computer science discipline, I'd say. And of course, the good old stigma of computer science and math being basically the same thing. Very, very present in student heads. And talking about pre and high school, there definitely is some cross coverage between those subjects. However, computer science goes way beyond seeing computers and computer programs as mathematical objects. For instance, thinking of computer architecture, specific programming languages, and so on. And yeah, last but not least, imagine being highly interested in the latter, programming, and you enter your computer science class on your very first day, excited and starry-eyed, and something you could be faced with is a task like this, that says, copy the following statement and execute it in your editor, followed up with something like this. Now, that is exactly how my first day in apprentice school has went, and let me tell you, it was absolutely terrifying. And it is no wonder that many students would feel intimidated, would feel discouraged, and lose motivation on their path of learning how to program. But yeah, let's look at the other side, because these might also be sentences that one has heard one time or another. The curriculum being outdated. Well, I guess somewhat excusable for such a fast-developing field as computer science. Something being required for the exam which needs a sheer memorization of facts, because testing understanding and practical application in a time frame of, let's say, 90 minutes is just not possible. The fast transition into home office during COVID times, with an entirely new study environment and setting, which neither students nor teachers were prepared for. And the surprise factor made it almost impossible to make this change a seamless one, so it certainly caused a disruption. And something I heard of quite often, and also experienced a lot, analyzing textbook code, analyzing example code, just as we've seen before, with little to no demand to write some yourself. And now you see, the slide might have turned into a bit of a rant, but no one likes complainers if they can't offer up a solution, right? So let's make ourselves aware of where we would like to head. I stumbled upon this quote by Richard Riley, former US Secretary of Education, which states, "Education should prepare young people for jobs that do not yet exist, using technologies that have not yet been invented to solve problems of which we are not yet aware." Now, that does sound like a true challenge, right? And I would love to say that the answer to this is just the apprenticeship concept, but I would like you to know where I'm coming from. And for one, we could try answering this challenge with a simple question. If you could make anything, what would you make? Because that is exactly what would get students to think about the future, wouldn't it? It is very likely that they would develop and take on something which has not been made yet in that shape and format. The precise moment that this question is being asked, student answers could begin looking something like this. Games, a task management app, a content creation platform, perhaps with a specific target audience in mind, a wish to contribute to existing projects, perhaps ones that are open source, maybe a wish to combine a whole other craft with computer science to perhaps sell something self-made online. So we could say that the key to bringing motivation to the table, to developing the wish to learn absolutely anything, could potentially be found in creativity, right? And yes, computer science can undoubtedly be perceived a creative domain. So to name a few examples, the design process of algorithms, the problem-solving process, and not to forget the part where you actually begin writing code. So creativity is in fact required, and its development and use should be encouraged at every instance. However, at schools and in the current education system, there is a general tendency that is pushing everybody to learn and do the same, with little to no demand to apply the skills and knowledge you have gained creatively. And it seems like it wouldn't be too bad of an idea to change that. Now, as you probably have expected, this is the part where it's the apprenticeship's concept time to shine. But first, let us decide on what we would even like to teach. As an apprentice enters a new workplace, wishing to become a certified software developer, these might be things that could be demanded of them. To know how to familiarize themselves with and work in new complex programming environments, knowing how to make use of all the tooling available, the libraries, the application frameworks, and the application programming interfaces, learning how to manage and deal with complexity by using methods of abstraction, encapsulation, and object-type relationships, but also perhaps even other forms of complexity not of a technical nature that we've spoken about in the beginning. Also learning how to work at different levels of granularity from large to small, and all these questions unified under one big simple one. How, while learning this, would it be possible to integrate theory and practice so one supports the other? In order to teach creatively, to foster motivation and engagement while learning those demands, one should differ between two main types of creativity: H creativity and P creativity. The term H creativity refers to historical creativity, meaning that a thought or concept was produced which no one in the whole history of mankind has ever thought of before, so something truly new and groundbreaking. P creativity, in turn, refers to an idea that was maybe surprising, but most importantly valuable and entirely new to the person that has produced it. Just because somebody else has already come up with an idea, well, that doesn't make your invention any less creative, right? And that is also the kind of creativity, the P creativity, that potentially could and also should be targeted in order to foster motivation, not only in lessons, but also in one's daily work life. So let's take a look at how that could be done. In order to foster a strong intrinsic motivation by targeting that exact type of creativity, 4 factors should come into play. And this does not only relate to computer science specifically, but it is very much applicable in all kinds of learning instances. These 4 factors are, as you can see on the slide, usage, reputation, identification, and learning. And you will find that these factors also very much influence your workday in one way or another. Well, regarding usage, a very obvious reason as to why software is even being developed, we would like to use it later on. That means the pieces of software developed should be serviceable, meaningful, and offer a concrete purpose to the learner. So pseudo-problem orientation will not be making the cut here. Second, reputation. For example, one of the maxims of the open source community is that each contribution of each developer can be exactly traced. So this way, every individual can build up a reputation which may be later on used for applications or to overall strengthen one's prestige in the community. So software developed should be distributed, presented, and shared with the world, no matter whether it is being developed within the classroom or outside of it, because all parties will benefit from it. Identification with the group can lead to a strong identification with the goals of that group and foster ambition. And this motive can also successfully be applied in all kinds of group projects. Promoting purposeful learning should last but not least be at the very forefront. So becoming aware of the use of the facts and concepts to be learned is key to satisfaction and motivation to learn any type of theory. Now, if we remember what we initially had intended for the apprentice to learn, and recall the four main drivers and motivators, we can make ourselves aware of the theory behind on-the-job training being so incredibly successful. So, usage and reputation. Do we even need to talk about this? Elvena, the game that I got to make contributions to, it has been played by millions. And there was one instance that I always remember then thinking about this at the Girls and Boys Day, where we had quite a couple of students coming into the company, and I was giving them a presentation of what it is that apprentices do here. And I jokingly asked, who of them has even played this game? And I was so surprised by the sheer amount of hands going up. So, yeah, usage and reputation are definitely a given. Identification with the group. Well, the team I'm working with and that I very much identify as part of, despite still being someone in training, applicable to both my times as an apprentice and an intern. Yeah, shout out to the Elvena team for being such a great and welcoming space for career starters. And, well, the learning that is in fact happening on a daily basis, be it through my colleagues or be it by taking on new tasks that had me digging through Stack Overflow for hours, or by entering a school or a university building. And this, the motivation that apprentices are getting and drawing, is exactly what would be required in classrooms, because that is what is making learning so effective. But let us not consider school for a moment. Let us consider someone picking up development as a hobby, perhaps even with the intention of breaking into the industry later on. This is something they could be faced with. Tutorials, course offers, communities, perhaps with misleading information, perhaps with truthful one you wouldn't know, learning platforms. And in no way am I stating that these are invaluable methods of learning. In fact, I've used each and every one of these resources. Unity Learn is still a platform I log in on very often and that I recommend at absolutely every instance. But do these methods of learning and somewhat mindlessly following tutorials or someone's advice leave a lot of room to get creative? Not really. And that is why motivation might be hard to keep up, and it could be a lot harder to actually stay persistent and achieve your goals. Now, apprenticeships apparently have all the four motivators. They do leave room to get creative, but are they in fact successful in preparing one for jobs that do not yet exist and tech to be invented? I hope you still remember the quote from the beginning. In order for apprenticeships to reach those desired results and for that concept to become fully established, it could take more than businesses simply being interested in teaching. For one, it is necessary for a unified curriculum to be put into place, one that collectively lists all theoretical concepts to be taught, maybe ones that also go beyond theoretical computer science, for example, basic knowledge in accounting. And Germany has an instance that is responsible for establishing these sort of curriculums, the Handelskammer, in short IHK, and in translation the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, representing the German economy. Also, there is a need to provide universal access to CS education and to enter partnerships, because so far only very, very few studios in Germany offer these kinds of apprenticeships for students. And I'm not sure about one hand, but I'm pretty sure I could count the current amount of openings on two. And compared to how many students are interested in entering this field, there is a very huge and very unfortunate mismatch. And of course, apprenticeships, as we've spoken about, need to drive project-based learning and influence the choice of field by highlighting the benefits of that field in order to also motivate the trainee to further pursue a career in said field, and in the best case, also in one's business. I imagine that I have seen and participated in a lot more hands-on projects at the company than I might have experienced choosing any other education path. So for one, I had the chance to get to know the company's ways of operation before making a transition into a game team where I got specifically trained, educated, and assigned tasks of any other regular developer. giving me a chance to immediately start contributing to the project. And that I think of as the biggest cue here, being treated like any other regular developer on the team. Because I heard from fellow students attending the apprentice school that in their companies it is a given to first work on practice projects, meaning also artificial problems. But being entrusted that real development experience is what really fostered my personal motivation. And those key factors we've also spoken about before. So usage reputation, identification, and learning. So a project-driven approach is also a very important factor in order for the concept to become truly successful. And not only successful, but also future-proof. Because what would students want for their education to look like in the future? They have now experienced the flexibility of home office learning throughout the pandemic. And of course, having experienced that, they would also expect their education to continue in this flexible, personalized format. They want their education to meet their interests, their time constraints, and their academic needs, and ideally hope that at this point I've proven that the apprenticeship can actually withstand all those demands. Students will seek being motivated and engaged through new means. Perhaps I would actually expect the majority here to have heard of the gamification concept, combining the words game and education. So it is being attempted to use game design elements in order to encourage learning in non-game contexts. An incredibly interesting field and topic. And finally, another student demand for the future, which we have ironically been talking about this whole time, the learn-as-you-go idea, which apprenticeships follow in every aspect. So this concept implies heavy on-the-job training and encourages for education to be outsourced, as mine was, for example, by being trained most of my time at the company, if you remember the time distribution from the beginning of the presentation. And it is still hard to say whether this concept could entirely eradicate education as we know it, because attending university still gives one access to the broader range of careers compared to apprenticeships. But seeing that, for example, internships are starting to become more and more mandatory within bachelor's degrees, we can already tell that student and industry engagement will certainly play a very, very big part in our future. Now, if you remember the beginning of the presentation, the quote I've presented you with was, "Why apprentices do not drink all the booze and hack all the things." Well, because the concept meets many student wishes, it meets many motivational factors and meets a lot of requirements that students have for their future, meaning that drinking all the booze and hacking all the things is in no way an incentive for students to even begin this apprenticeship. And it is very much worrying that the concept is so heavily stigmatized, if you remember the numbers from the beginning. So it is very good to see that there are currently a whole lot of trends in legislation and funding and in numerous employer-driven programs to fight that stigma and to promote the benefits of this concept. And over the recent years, the population has in fact also been shifting in favor of apprenticeships. But yeah, for example, the pandemic has brought it even more to light that this concept will always entail an agreement between two parties. So for one, students that are interested in pursuing this apprenticeship and businesses that are interested in employing these students. And in times of uncertainty and many businesses changing their ways of operation, both parties were actually more hesitant to enter these kinds of contracts. So that I think we're also at this point almost running out of time. We have reached the end of my presentation and ideally hope you have learned something new about circulating stigmas, about education, about what drives you to learn and work, and hopefully it has also raised your awareness on us, the career starters, and our needs, what we might be doing in this industry, what might be going on through our heads as we enter your workplace each morning. And very hopefully, it has also motivated you to come in touch with us, to reach out to that one career starter on your team, to think about ways of creative teaching, and to pass on some of your knowledge to us. Yeah, with that, I would like to conclude my talk. In case you would like to reach out, please feel free to do so via email or LinkedIn. I'm also more than happy to have a conversation with you after this session has concluded, and you're also likely to catch me at the Gamescom in the following days. Yeah, but for now, I'd be very happy to take any additional questions you may have, and I'd like to thank you for attending my very first conference talk.
Can you hear me now? Okay, awesome. We have time for one, maybe two questions, if we keep it a bit short. Do we have questions? Yes.
Hello.
Hey.
How many apprentices did your company have? Were you the only one?
No, I am definitely not the only one. It varies each year how many apprentices we're taking. We're also not only taking apprentices in the software development discipline, we also have apprentices in marketing and office management. And yeah, it does vary each year. In the year that I entered the company, we employed 4 software development apprentices and 1 in marketing. But yeah, it's every year, I would say on average, maybe like 3 to 10 apprentices. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I was curious what made you switch to game design after having completed the vocational training as a programmer.
I would say for the most part curiosity and collaboration within the team, because as a programmer I got to collaborate a lot with our game design team, and yeah, I've noticed that the disciplines are not all that different. I would say both are very much about problem solving, and yeah, I didn't mind basically switching disciplines and trying out the problem solving that our game designers were doing. And then I stumbled upon the university degree, and that's how it all kind of came into shape. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions, but thank you for asking questions, and thank you for
Yes.
the amazing talk. It was truly inspiring and very helpful and insightful. Thank you for all for coming, and I'll see you maybe in the next talk.
Thank you very, very much.